The Jets' 2022 season is over, and unfortunately, it ended in a loss. The Jets fell to the Miami Dolphins yesterday by the unusual score of 11-6. We will break down what happened and what happens next today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, January 9th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button wherever you are watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help the channel out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for our listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Well, the 2022 season is now officially over for the New York Jets, and unfortunately it ended in a loss as the Jets fell to the Miami Dolphins 11-6 yesterday in Miami. And unfortunately it was a game because the Dolphins got some help that puts Miami back in the playoffs for the first time since 2016. So one team in the AFC East ends a long playoff drought this season, and unfortunately it's the Miami Dolphins. You know, watching this game yesterday at the end, I took solace in one thing, and that's as the game ended, it was 11-6 because the Jets took a safety on their final play, this desperation play. It was one of those try and lateral the ball around to get the ball down the field, and they ended up throwing it at the back of the end zone. So that took a 9-6 game to an 11-6 final score. And the solace that I took was I knew I had to have watched NFL history because that's such a weird score that you'd think that was the first 11-6 game in NFL history, but it actually was not because it was pointed out to me, and I had forgotten this, the 1999 NFC Championship game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the St. Louis Rams also ended 11-6. So after watching the Dolphins celebrate, the Jets ending their season on a 6-game losing streak, the Dolphins making the playoffs, I can't even say I watched history because there was another 11-6 game back. It was the 99 season. It happened in January of 2000, 23 years ago. So, and ironically, that was a game that's remembered for an infamous play. There was a Tampa Bay receiver, Bert Emanuel, on Tampa Bay's final drive who caught a pass. The ball hit the ground in his grasp, but because the ball hit the ground, it was ruled incomplete. And they changed the rule after that game that the ball can hit the ground as long as it doesn't move. And there was a critical play in this game where that rule almost came into play, except the officials ruled that the ball hit the ground and moved. It was a pass to Garrett Wilson that could have set the Jets up to go for it on a 4th down late in a tied 6-6 game. So, a lot of correlations between 11-6 games of past and present, but the Jets do lose this one. And I think this game did not matter a whole lot for the New York Jets. They obviously were going to miss the playoffs. In fact, the way the games worked out yesterday, the way the other teams performed, the Jets were locked into the 13th pick whether they won or lost. So this game had zero impact on the Jets' draft status. So heading into this game, I know there were probably some fans who were rooting for a loss for draft status. It helped the Jets out. It ended up not mattering. However, even if the Jets had won this game, I don't know it would have made that big of a difference because, you get late in the season and people talk about things like culture. We're building something going forward. And to an extent, I think that could be true. But here's the problem. You can't really say a win is a culture-building win when you lost 5 in a row heading into the game and you were already eliminated from the playoffs. It's tough to take that as a meaningful victory. I think really what yesterday's game did is it kind of painted the immediate end-of-season narrative because there should be very mixed views on what the Jets did this year. Heading into the season, if you said 7 wins, we're going to be playing meaningful games in December, we'll be alive till Week 16, we'll have a chance to win an 8th game Week 18, almost everybody would have signed up for it. But I've said this in the last couple of weeks, the way you get there, the journey there, can matter just as much. And the fact that the Jets lost this game, I think it's going to bring back all the bad feelings that have existed. The Jets head into the offseason on a 6-game losing streak, a team that was 7-4. Again, heading after Thanksgiving weekend, they were 7-4. Heading into the month of December, doesn't win another game. It's tough. And if the Jets had won this game yesterday, I think it would have calmed things down a little bit, because at least you'd end the season on a positive note. You could look at it, you could have said, all right, 8-9, we almost finished 500. At least there was something good that happened after the month of December. At least the Jets did not end the season on a collapse, even if the win did not really help them make the playoffs. You could have looked at it that way had the Jets won the game. And I think, once we get some distance from this season, I think once we, get a few weeks, a few months away, we'll probably have a more nuanced view of what happened in this season for the Jets, because there were some good things. The Jets went 7-9 3 years ago, and it was a completely meaningless 7-9. I think this 7-10 means more, because you saw young players begin to develop. You had what really was just a phenomenal year for the rookie class that the Jets brought in this year. Now, you had some other young players like Elijah Moore and Michael Carter who maybe did not develop the way you were looking, but it feels like there's legitimate improvement. And the Jets may not be a great team right now, but the issues we have with the Jets right now are more normal NFL fan issues, where we're frustrated because our team didn't play well down the stretch and we missed the playoffs. It's not issues we won 2 games and we were eliminated before the month of October like 2 years ago. These are more the problems most NFL fan bases deal with. So, clearly some steps taken forward, but again, it's difficult to feel too good about that right now, and I understand why you wouldn't feel good about it, because I don't feel very good about the way the Jets ended the season. Now, if you're looking for a positive, I think one of the things we've found through the years with the Jets is the way you end the season, and we always put significance on it. I always put significance on it, but if you really think this through, the way you end the season, I guess occasionally maybe it carries over, but in reality, there's not really a lot of correlation, because I can think through many Jets seasons that seemed lost and hopeless, and then suddenly the Jets are winning some games in December, and the cynic in you might say, well, the Jets, when they won those December games, cost themselves draft position. But at the time, and that year I mentioned in 2019, a few years ago, was a perfect example, and that began before December. The Jets won 6 of their last 8 games that year, and it had zero carryover effect. The Jets went into 2020 and almost went 0-16 in 2020 after winning 6 of their last 8 in 2019. So if you're looking at this and you want to say that the Jets are going to carry this over to next year, well, I don't know that that's the case. And I don't want to necessarily lean too hard into the idea that the Jets are going to get some injured players back, because every team has injuries. Every team's getting its injured players back. And also, the Jets are going to suffer injuries next year. But you lost a lot of critical players at critical points this year, and that's part of the story of the season. It's not everything, but it's also not nothing. It's part of the story of the season. So just because the Jets ended the season poorly, I don't think there's any question that, unless you have catastrophic injury luck in training camp in the preseason next year, the team that takes the field week 1 of 2023, 9 months from now, once we get to, I guess it'll be 8 months from now, when we get to early September, it's going to be better than the team that was on the field yesterday in Miami. But I think more than anything, this game paints the immediate narrative. It doesn't necessarily paint the narrative we'll discuss all offseason, but it paints the narrative as the season ended in an immediate way over the next couple days, how we think about things. And it was an opportunity to maybe stop some of the negativity that's around the franchise. And unfortunately, now there's going to be a lot of negativity, because the Jets, frankly, have earned some negativity. The Jets have earned a lot of it after finishing the season 6 straight losses, going from great position to finish the season in the playoffs. If at the very least, they had a great opportunity to finish the season over 500 and end their drought of finishing over 500, which has lasted since 2015. That all fell by the wayside, unfortunately, for the Jets, and they could not even end the season on a winning note. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the way the Jets approach this game. I thought that they made a mistake. I understand the game plan that they put together, but I did not think it was the best game plan to help them win, and I'll tell you why I think that as we continue this Monday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Tommy John's. Winter mornings are brutal, so here's my tip for tackling the day in comfort. Grab new Tommy John Loungewear and take cozy wherever you go. When you start the year in Tommy John's, you're that much more comfortable, so you can do everything better. Tommy John Loungewear, pajamas, and underwear have dozens of comfort innovations, like luxuriously soft in-blend and micro-modal fabrics with four-way stretch. With over 20 million pairs sold and thousands of five-star reviews, people love Tommy John. That's why Tommy John doesn't just have customers, they have fanatics. Plus, it's all backed by Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear or its free guarantee. Get 20% off your first order at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. Again, that's 20% off right now at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. Unfortunately, life does not come with a user manual, so when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills. This makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, and accessible anywhere, 100% online. Therapy has so many benefits. It helps you learn coping skills, self-empowerment, it helps you learn how to deal with trauma. Everybody deserves to feel at their best, and BetterHelp makes it easier to get started. As the world's largest therapy service, they've matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. There's no waiting rooms, there's no traffic, there's no endless searching for the right therapist. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist, and if things are not clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It could not be simpler. So get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. We're here today breaking down a defeat for the New York Jets. The final game of the 2022 season, the Jets lose to the Dolphins by the unusual score of 11-6. The second 11-6 final score in NFL history. We just missed out on watching NFL score history, but the 1999 NFC Championship game between the Rams and the Bucs was also an 11-6 final score. You knew that this was going to be a low-scoring game going in when you matched Joe Flacco against Skylar Thompson. And I felt like the Jets' game plan was understandable. I really got what they were trying to do because they played very conservatively on both sides of the ball, at least at the beginning of the game, really the first two and a half to 3 quarters of this game. On the defensive side of the ball, you saw a lot of too high safety looks from the Jets, where they were essentially playing conservatively. They were playing to prevent the big play. And I think there were a couple of reasons they did this. First of all, with Skylar Thompson at quarterback, it was going to be really difficult for Miami to sustain drives because you just don't have the type of quarterback play where you're going to be able to execute at a high level 11, 12, 13, 14 plays in a row. It just, at some point, your quarterback's going to mess up when you have Skylar Thompson under center. So really the biggest danger for the Jets was allowing a big play to one of the speedy Miami receivers, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. So essentially to avoid that, they played 2 safeties deep a whole lot. And they also played, Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed deep. Essentially, 2 across, 2 deep, sometimes 4 across the back when you added in the corners. Essentially, they built a wall in the back of the defense to prevent the big play, and you could tell even the way the corners were playing, their job was to not get beat deep because the best way Miami was going to score a touchdown was on a big play. So the Jets were playing to prevent the big play. But when you play too deep, you also leave yourself vulnerable to the run, and Miami ran the ball at will on the Jets in this game. I feel like part of the rationale for that was they were kind of daring Miami to run the ball, and Robert Saleh knows Mike McDaniel, who's the Miami head coach and play caller. And I feel like Saleh knew McDaniel well enough that he felt like McDaniel was eventually just going to get impatient and throw the ball. And you saw that a couple times. The Fox broadcast crew pointed that out, that Miami ran the ball at will. I mean, there were a couple of series where Miami got into Jets territory, and it was really all based on the run game. And then the Dolphins started throwing the ball because McDaniel just got impatient. So I think Saleh knowing McDaniel well, maybe that played into it because they knew that eventually Miami would just stop running, even though the Jets were giving them the run by playing 2 safeties back. Then on the offensive side of the ball, I think what the Jets did was, this was true the first maybe 2.5 quarters, and they eventually adjusted, but they played a very conservative game plan. Even on like some third and manageables, they were running the ball, lots of early down runs, and it was not working very well. But it felt like it wasn't working very well in part because the Jets had 3 backup offensive linemen playing in this game. But it felt like the Jets viewed this, and this was something I said in the Friday game preview, that the game very well may come down to which team does not make the critical turnover. So the Jets played it very conservatively. I don't know that this is actually is a concept known as complementary football, where sometimes you're not playing the defense that's going to best stop the other team. Sometimes you're not playing the offense that's necessarily going to score your team the most points, but you're taking an approach which meshes the offensive approach and the defensive approach, and you're doing it because you think that those two approaches combined, even if it's not the best individual defensive approach and it's not the best individual offensive approach, those approaches combined are the best way to win the game. So the Jets came with a game plan that I felt was kind of like complementary football, which I like to see complementary football because I think too many times teams view the defense and the offense as separate entities, but they should really be supporting each other. Now, that said, I did not love this approach for a couple of reasons. Number one is, when you've invested as much at the corner position as the Jets have, and not only have you invested a lot, but you also gotten great play. The Jets have two corners who should be able to stand up against Gardner. Should be able to stand up against Hill and Waddle, in Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. And I did not love the fact that the Jets were just allowing the Dolphins to gash them in the run game. Even if the drives eventually stalled, I felt like the Jets should have committed more to stopping the run, because that's the whole reason you invest in the corners, because you want them to be able to hold up against these elite receivers. Now, the Jets took a similar approach defensively in the first game, and it worked out pretty well, but I didn't love this approach, in part because on the other side of the ball, if you're just going to run the ball a lot, you're not going to be able to do it with you're not going to be able to do it effectively with three backup offensive linemen. So if you've essentially set up a situation where the other team's going to be able to run at will, and you're leaning into the run, you can't run at all, the other team's going to control field position, they're going to have the ball longer, and they're going to control the territory in the game. And it's going to be tougher for you to win because they're going to win the field position battle because they're going to be able to run the ball and you're not. Now, the Jets eventually adjusted in this game when they fell behind 6-3. Essentially, they just started throwing the ball to Garrett Wilson all the time. And that was a better approach because Dolphins could not cover Garrett Wilson in this game. Garrett Wilson, if the Jets had started this game throwing the ball to Garrett Wilson, they may have jumped out ahead. And they may have been playing with a lead, and then it would have become much more difficult for Miami. But they did not do that. They essentially tried to play it close. And the other issue I got with this approach is that when you're essentially turning it into a run game, our run game versus your run game, it's going to be a very tight game. You're guaranteeing it's going to be a tight game. And you essentially put yourself in a spot where one bad call can cost you everything. And that's what happened in this game, because on the final drive Miami had, with the score 6-6, Quincy Williams got called for, if I'm going to be nice, it was a borderline horse collar. You didn't grab the horse. It can't be a horse collar if you don't grab the horse collar. You grab jersey, which is not a horse collar. And I thought it was a terrible call, and that ended up looming very large because that was a huge play in the game. The Jets had Miami's pinned back in their own side of the field, so it gave Miami new life, but it also gave them 15 critical yards when they just got into field goal range, and they were able to kick a field goal right before time expired. So, I look at this, I understand why they did what they did, and I explained why they did what they did, but I feel like this approach was flawed, and I feel like sometimes you get too conservative in these games when, I mentioned, and I said this on Friday, so I do have to take some of the grief for this. I said, it could come down to a big turnover. Well, you know what? It also could come down to the big play your team makes. And Garrett Wilson, the way he was playing, he was a playmaking machine in this game. If the Jets had just featured him a little bit more, especially on some of these early down runs that were constantly putting them behind the sticks the first 2.5 quarters of this game, maybe Garrett could have broken a big one. Maybe he could have scored the touchdown that was absent in this game, because there were no touchdowns in this game. And unfortunately, the Jets just did not get enough offense in this one. And their defense, I don't blame the defense, because the defense gave up 3 field goals, but Jets just did not get enough to win this game. So now the season's over. Now we're going to look to the offseason. And, of course, Black Monday is coming up. It's today. What's going to happen with the Jets? We'll discuss as we continue this Monday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You can manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You are responsible for hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. All this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go and as you want, where and when you want to. Locked On Jets listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On all caps in the game store. Again, that's Locked On in all caps. Promo code, so be sure to check it out today. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. The season is over now for the New York Jets, and we begin the long offseason. And it begins on Monday, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Jets on Monday. Now, it seems on paper like Joe Douglas is probably safe. It seems like not many people are expecting the Jets to fire Robert Saleh. Even the offensive coordinator spot with Mike LaFleur, that's up in the air as well. But there's a bit of a wild card here, and it's the guy who's a human wild card. It's Woody Johnson. And there have been all kinds of reports from national reporters who say Woody Johnson's very angry about the way the team ended the season. Now, we don't know what that means. We don't know what's going to happen. And notably, Woody Johnson did not speak to the media after this game when he had an opportunity, which was always a bit of a red flag because it's very easy for the owner to say, hey, we're keeping these guys. And he's done that in the past. There have been seasons in the past where Woody Johnson's attended the finale of the season and said, we're keeping these guys. So, what can we expect tomorrow? What can we expect today? It's difficult to know exactly what's going on. But here's what troubles me with this. If you want to say the Jets should get rid of Robert Saleh, we can have a discussion about that. I'd be inclined to give Saleh another year. I'd be inclined to give Joe Douglas another year. I think the way things line up for the Jets, this is not going to be an offseason where they're going to have a ton of cap space. There could be an offseason where, the Jets will be able to make a move here or move there, address some priorities. But essentially the team that you see on the field is not going to be that dissimilar to the 2022 Jets. So for me, it's kind of like next year's kind of like a natural judgment year for these guys because you're not really going to change the team a whole lot. You'll get the injured guys back, which will be great. But, the core of the team is going to be essentially the same because you can't really spend big 2 straight years. The Jets spent really big last year. So the Jets essentially the Jets spent so much money that they locked in their roster for 2 years. So, you get rid of the GM, you get rid of the coach this year. Well, you still got the same team, except you're bringing in the coach who has players who fit a scheme from a different coach. If you bring in a new coach, you have players who were brought in to run Saleh's scheme. So for me, I view the situation as part of it's, look, the Jets, whether or not they finish the season strong, and whether or not you want to view this as a success, I think the Jets did show progress this year. I don't think that I think we're past the point where we can take moral victories. I think we are past the point where we're grading on a curve anymore. Next year, the Jets are being graded as a regular NFL team. Are they going to make the playoffs? That's the standard most teams have. That's the standard for the Jets next year. I'd be inclined to keep these guys another year. What troubles me, though, is that if you're going to make a change, I want to see a plan in place. I don't want to see, let's see what other coordinator we can bring in. I want to see something planned. Like, we have laid the groundwork and we're bringing in Sean Payton, or we've laid the groundwork and we're bringing in Jim Harbaugh. We've had enough of this. We're bringing in a proven guy and we've already done the groundwork. I doubt very much Woody Johnson has done any sort of planning. So all firings are not created equally. And if the Jets make a big move, and let's say they get rid of Mike LaFleur, well, something, what the Jets do at quarterback is going to matter a lot more than getting rid of Mike LaFleur. And I know Mike LaFleur is an unpopular guy, and he's earned some of that. And frankly, I would not shed a tear if the Jets made a change at offensive coordinator. But I could see Mike LaFleur coming back and the Jets improving their roster, and especially at the quarterback position, and Mike LaFleur having more success. I mean, just think about this. A year ago, everybody wanted Jeff Ulbrich out of here. Everybody said Jeff Ulbrich has no idea how to scheme. Nothing. This Jets defense is terrible. Ulbrich's awful. Well, they brought in players who could run the scheme, and suddenly, nobody's really calling for Jeff Ulbrich's job anymore. I think the same applies to Mike LaFleur. But what you can't do what you can't do today is go in there and fire people, and then there's no plan, and we're going to see what happens. That, to me, would be an issue. And to me, that's the most likely scenario if Woody Johnson makes a change. Because to me it would feel like there was a plan in place. All right, we had some hiccups down the stretch, but more or less the plan so far has been moving in the right direction. We'll give it one more. We're not giving anybody an extension. We're not even giving anybody more than next year, but we'll give this one more year to see how it works out. To me, that's a plan. If you're just going to go in there and pull the plug on it, you can't just say we'll figure out what the plan is going forward. There needs to be some sort of solid direction for the franchise, because you can't have success if you're just constantly changing the plan and just flying blind if you don't know what direction you want to take this thing in. So we'll see how Woody Johnson responds to this. We'll see how the Jets respond today and in the days ahead. But for now, that's all for this episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show, please give it a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source, or a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you so much to everybody who watched this show or listened to this show through the 2022 season. And I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here through the offseason. We'll continue to be on Monday through Friday. We'll break down what happened in 2022 in a more detailed way in the days and weeks ahead. We'll get ready for free agency. Then we'll get ready for the draft. It's going to be a fun offseason here, so I hope you'll stay with us. But for today, take care, everybody, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.